There's a weapon that shows up in nearly every serious World War I film, and most people watching don't fully understand what they're looking at. A pump-action shotgun with a fixed bayonet carried by American soldiers into the worst close-quarters fighting in human history. It's the Winchester Model 1897, conceived by John Moses Browning, the same engineer who would later produce the M1911 pistol and the Browning .50 caliber machine gun. A man with a gift for designing weapons that outlived their era by decades. The 1897 was manufactured continuously from its introduction through 1957, with total production exceeding 1 million units. It served American forces across 6 major conflicts, from Cuba in 1898 through the jungles of Southeast Asia 70 years later. But its standard form wasn't what made it infamous. A specific set of military modifications, a shortened 20-inch barrel, a ventilated heat shield running the length of the magazine tube, a bayonet lug at the muzzle, transformed a reliable sporting gun into something that alarmed the German Empire enough to file a formal diplomatic protest under the laws of war. The same German Empire that had released chlorine gas clouds over Allied trenches at Ypres in 1915, the same military that had deployed flamethrowers, weapons whose only function was to project burning fuel onto living human beings. The same army that had developed mustard gas, specifically for its ability to cause chemical burns, destroy lung tissue, and permanently blind its victims. That nation decided the Winchester Model 1897 went too far. They didn't just object, they threatened to execute any American soldier found carrying one. That contradiction tells you something important, not about German hypocrisy, though there's plenty of that. It tells you something about the specific nature of fear, and about what this particular weapon did to the men who encountered it. Browning designed the 1897 to fix what his earlier Model 1893 couldn't handle: the new generation of smokeless powder ammunition that became standard in the 1890s. The original action wasn't strong enough for the pressures involved. The 1897 replaced it with a heavier receiver and a more robust overall design, one that proved capable of functioning in conditions that would disable more sophisticated mechanisms entirely. Mud, freezing temperatures, standing water, the gun kept working. Soldiers could strip and reassemble it with minimal training. The mechanical simplicity that made it cheap to produce also made it nearly impossible to break, which is why original examples from the early 1900s still cycle reliably today. But one design choice, almost certainly made without any combat application in mind, became the weapon's defining characteristic in trench warfare. The 1897 used an external hammer and contained no trigger disconnector, the component that prevents a firearm from firing again until the trigger is deliberately released and re-engaged. Without it, a shooter could hold the trigger depressed and cycle the pump action continuously. Every time the bolt closed, the hammer fell, the gun fired. There was no need to release and pull again between shots. This was slam fire, and it made the 1897 function less like a manually operated shotgun and more like a semi-automatic weapon with an unusually fast operator. The numbers make the tactical implication concrete. A German soldier armed with the standard Gewehr 98 bolt-action rifle, an excellent weapon by any measure, could sustain perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute under favorable conditions. That's 1 round every 4 seconds, with a complete bolt cycle required between each. A practiced American soldier running slam fire on the 1897 could discharge the full 6-round magazine in under 2 seconds. Not 6 rifle rounds, 6 shotgun shells, each containing 9 lead pellets of .33 caliber diameter, each pellet roughly equivalent in size to a 9mm handgun projectile, each traveling at approximately 1,300 feet per second. The full magazine produced 54 individual projectiles in the time it takes to exhale, in a corridor 6 feet wide. What's worth noting here, and what rarely gets discussed, is that the 1897's lethality in trenches wasn't primarily about the slam fire rate. It was about the intersection of that rate with the physical geometry of the environment. In open terrain, a shotgun spread pattern is a limitation. At range, pellets disperse, energy drops, accuracy becomes meaningless. Trenches eliminated every one of those disadvantages and converted them into strengths. The spread pattern that would be useless at 100 yards became total coverage at 15 feet. The 6-round capacity that seems modest by modern standards produced 54 projectiles in a space too narrow to step sideways in. The weapon and the environment were a near-perfect match. When the United States entered the war in April 1917, Army ordnance planners confronted a problem they hadn't fully anticipated. The Springfield 1903 rifle, accurate, reliable, and genuinely superior to most of what the other side was carrying, was designed around a completely different set of tactical assumptions. It was 44 inches long, it was bolt-operated, it was optimized for engagements at hundreds of yards. Trench warfare didn't offer those conditions. The typical trench ran 4 to 6 feet across, with traverses and blind corners built into the design specifically to limit the damage from grenades and flanking fire. Combat inside this system happened at distances a sprinting man could cover in a second or two. Whoever got their weapon operational first generally survived the encounter. The Springfield's virtues became liabilities the moment a soldier rounded a corner into an occupied trench section. The Ordnance Department's solution was to requisition the 1897 and modify it. Heat shields prevented barrel burns after rapid firing. Bayonet lugs provided a last resort option when ammunition ran dry. Military sling fittings and U.S. stampings made them official. The designation became the Model 1897 trench gun, and Winchester eventually delivered approximately 19,000 dedicated military versions, with converted civilian models pushing the total in service to an estimated 25,000 guns. What happened when those guns entered German trench sections is documented from both sides. The standard military load was double-aught buckshot, 9 pellets per shell, each one roughly 0.33 inches across, grouped into a pattern that spread to between 8 and 12 inches at typical engagement distances of around 20 feet. Running slam fire, a trained soldier emptied the magazine in 2 seconds. 54 pellets crossed 20 feet of confined space before any German soldier in that corridor could complete a single bolt cycle. Each pellet carried approximately 150 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at that range, enough to penetrate 4 to 6 inches into muscle tissue, enough to fracture bone, enough to destroy an organ. 9 of those pellets per round, 6 rounds per trigger hold, produces a wound count that overwhelms any field medical response. German medical staff treating survivors noted injury patterns unlike anything produced by rifle or machine gun fire. Multiple simultaneous penetrating wounds distributed across the torso, limbs, and face, all resulting from a single firing sequence. A physician near Belleau Wood wrote in his field diary that the wound distributions appeared almost methodical, as though the injuries had been designed specifically to damage the maximum possible number of body systems at once. He was correct, in a sense, just not by human design. It was geometry. The trench walls compounded everything. Timber framing, packed sandbags, corrugated metal sheeting, all hard surfaces that lead pellets struck and ricocheted off at angles the shooter couldn't predict, and the target certainly couldn't anticipate. German soldiers who survived these encounters reported being struck from directions that seemed geometrically impossible given the shooter's position. They described the sound that preceded everything else, something like fabric tearing suddenly, followed immediately by screaming. The Americans called the technique sweeping, and the word is precisely accurate. You moved the gun through the space the way you'd move a broom across a floor. The result was similar. There was no effective defensive response available to a soldier caught in a trench section when a shotgun opened up. Getting behind a timber support didn't work. The pellets either punched through or curved around it. Rushing the shooter didn't work. 6 rounds arrived faster than a man could cover 20 feet at a sprint. Returning fire with a bolt-action rifle didn't work. By the time the first cycle completed, the shooter had already been hit multiple times. The tactical problem was genuine and unsolvable with the tools German infantry carried. French soldiers watching from adjacent positions developed an expression for what shotgun wounds look like. La balayette du diable, the devil's broom, because that's what the wound pattern suggested. Something had swept through the casualty, distributing damage across the body the way a broom distributes debris across a floor. On September 19, 1918, the German government transmitted a formal diplomatic protest through neutral Switzerland. The document, signed by the High Command, invoked the 1907 Hague Convention's provisions on weapons causing unnecessary suffering. It named the Winchester Model 1897 specifically. It described the weapon as barbarous. It argued that the physical trauma the gun produced exceeded what international law permitted. Then it threatened summary execution for any American soldier captured while carrying a shotgun or shotgun ammunition. Not prisoner of war processing, not internment, immediate execution in the field as a war criminal. Hold that position for a moment and consider the source. German chemical weapons had killed approximately 90,000 Allied soldiers by that point in the war. Flamethrowers had been in operational German use since 1915. Mustard gas had been specifically engineered to cause blistering, pulmonary destruction, and permanent blindness. Ships, marked clearly with Red Cross identification, had been sunk. The nation responsible for every one of those decisions had identified a 6-shot pump-action shotgun as the weapon that violated acceptable standards. The hypocrisy is real, but it isn't the whole story. Washington's response was swift and entirely without accommodation. Secretary of State Robert Lansing communicated through the same Swiss intermediaries that the United States rejected the protest completely. He added a counter-threat that matched the German position in directness. Any execution of an American prisoner for carrying a shotgun would result in equivalent treatment of German prisoners in American custody. The War Department then did something that transformed a diplomatic exchange into a psychological operation. They ordered additional trench guns shipped to France, more, not fewer. And they arranged for German intelligence to receive that information through channels that were, conveniently, less secure than usual. The protest hadn't come from strategic calculation. It had come from the trenches, transmitted upward through the command structure by soldiers and officers who were encountering something that 4 years of war hadn't prepared them for. When American intelligence interrogated German prisoners, the pattern was consistent. Men who had survived artillery barrages, gas attacks, and machine gun fire expressed a specific fear of the shotgun that applied to nothing else. A lieutenant from the 5th Grenadier Regiment told his interrogators that his men would accept orders to assault a machine gun position before they would willingly enter a close-quarters engagement against soldiers carrying shotguns. He explained why with tactical precision. Machine guns could be flanked, suppressed with artillery, neutralized through terrain use. A man with a shotgun in a trench offered none of those options. The choice was binary: retreat or absorb what was coming. Private Frank Benz of the 5th Marine Regiment kept a personal diary throughout the Belleau Wood campaign in June 1918, carrying a Model 1897 for the duration. One entry describes a communication trench encounter at roughly 5 paces. 3 German soldiers, no warning, no time. He fired twice before any of the 3 had raised a weapon. All 3 went down in under a second. His squad pushed forward and found 8 more Germans in the next traverse. All 8 surrendered immediately upon seeing the shotgun. They didn't wait to assess intent. The weapon's reputation had arrived before the man carrying it. That detail matters. The 1897's psychological effect had begun to operate independently of the weapon itself. German standing orders captured in the war's final months specifically warned sentries to watch for Americans carrying what they called Grabenflinten, trench brooms, treating the weapon's presence as a threat category distinct from everything else. An intercepted letter from a German soldier writing home to Bavaria described an American raid in which shotgun-armed troops cleared roughly 50 meters of occupied trench in under a minute. He wrote that they had no answer for it. When those men appeared with those guns, you either ran or you died standing there. The execution threat was never acted upon. American military records contain no verified cases of soldiers killed specifically for carrying a shotgun rather than processed as prisoners. Whether this reflects the compressed timeline, the armistice came 58 days after the protest, or whether Lansing's counter-threat made the consequences too clear, the historical record doesn't fully resolve. What it does resolve is the question of what the protest signified. Germany didn't formally object to the Browning automatic rifle, which produced far more sustained firepower and killed Germans in much larger numbers. They didn't protest American grenades, standard equipment in every trench raid. They didn't raise diplomatic objections to American artillery, which caused the vast majority of German casualties across the entire war. They protested the shotgun, only the shotgun, because it was dominating the specific tactical environment where the war's small unit decisions were actually made. The Marine Corps made the most systematic use of it. During the Belleau Wood fighting, June 1st through June 26, 1918, some of the most intense close-quarters combat on the entire Western Front, Marine units carried the 1897 extensively. Private Carl Brandon described a moment during house-to-house clearing in Boresh village when he turned into a doorway and found 3 German soldiers at 3 meters. 2 shots on slam fire, all 3 down. He wrote afterward that there was no conscious aiming. The gun was already pointing where his eyes were. 2 pumps, 2 shots, finished. A second, possibly less. By November 1918, roughly 20% of soldiers in dedicated assault formations carried trench guns, not by general issue, but by specific request from platoon and company commanders who had observed the results and wanted more. Certain units exceeded that proportion substantially. The 2nd Battalion of the 5th Marines reported nearly a third of their frontline riflemen carrying shotguns in the war's final weeks. The armistice didn't retire the weapon. The Pacific theater of World War II reproduced the tactical conditions that had made it effective in France. Cave systems, bunker complexes, jungle fighting measured in feet rather than yards. Marines clearing Japanese positions on Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa found again that inside a fortified cave, a rifle was the wrong answer. Korea brought the 1897 into military police service. Vietnam returned it to frontline use. Tunnel rats, the soldiers who volunteered to enter Viet Cong underground networks and fight whatever they found, valued the 1897 specifically because slam fire remained exactly as relevant in a tunnel as it had been in a French trench. In underground passages, sometimes too narrow to turn around in, the ability to discharge a full magazine in under 2 seconds without releasing the trigger was worth more than any consideration of precision. Riverine patrol boats mounted them. Helicopter door gunners kept them as emergency close-range weapons. The Army formally retired the last Model 1897s in the mid-1960s, with some remaining in military police service into the following decade. A weapon designed in the 19th century had served in combat across nearly 7 decades and 6 wars. Its successors, the Benelli M4, the Mossberg 590A1, occupy the same operational role today. Door breaching, room clearing, close quarters engagements, but both incorporate trigger disconnectors. Slamfire has been engineered out of modern military shotguns, classified as a safety hazard rather than a tactical feature. The specific capability that defined the 1897's combat character no longer exists in standard military service. The German protest remains one of the stranger episodes in the legal history of armed conflict. A military establishment that had demonstrated no particular restraint about drowning men in their own lung fluid, burning them alive, blinding them chemically, or sinking medical vessels, decided that a 6-shot pump-action shotgun represented an unacceptable escalation of violence. The obvious reading is hypocrisy, and it is that. But there's something underneath the hypocrisy worth examining. The German military wasn't functionally afraid of American artillery. 4 years of constant bombardment had produced grim familiarity with it, along with the tactics to minimize casualties from it. They weren't especially afraid of American machine guns. The methods for suppressing, flanking, and neutralizing machine gun positions had been written in blood across years of fighting on the Western Front. They weren't even notably concerned about American rifles. They were afraid of a weapon that removed every variable they had learned to manage. In darkness, in a space too narrow to maneuver in, at distances where training, tactics, and experience offered nothing useful, against a gun that fired faster than a human nervous system could register the first shot and respond. Every advantage the German soldier carried into those trenches, discipline, experience, marksmanship, tactical doctrine, became irrelevant the moment someone with a Model 1897 came around the same corner. The 1897 never produced German casualties in numbers that rivaled artillery, or machine guns, or gas. But it produced them in a way that was immediate, inescapable, and psychologically devastating at a level that the raw casualty figures don't capture. It killed men before they could react. It left survivors with experiences they couldn't integrate into any tactical framework. It generated enough institutional fear that a military government formally demanded its removal from the battlefield under international law. That is a strange kind of distinction for a shotgun to hold, and it's worth knowing that you can still purchase a Winchester Model 1897 today, take it to a range, hold the trigger back, and work the pump. 6 rounds downrange in under 3 seconds, 54 lead projectiles in the time it takes to register what's happening. When you feel that in your hands, the German diplomatic protest starts to make a different kind of sense. One encounter in a trench was enough for most German soldiers to reach the same conclusion.